Good evening and welcome everybody. Now, throughout the 20th century, a minority of people got another load of people to kill each other. The entire century was littered with mass genocide, be it by war, deliberate famine, or via political ideology. The main question should be, how did a minority get the masses to believe a pack of lies so as to enable them to kill another mass of people because they thought it was the correct thing to do? Dictators such as Stalin or Mao were responsible for an organized killing machine that led to the deaths of millions. But how did they do it? The simple answer was they used propaganda, probably one of the most powerful weapons in the world. Now, propaganda evolved into public relations. Now, in the 21st century, public relations has moved on. Along with methods of mass genocide, it is now more subtle, whereby the masses are blindly led to believe another pack of lies. Local and national government are using an advanced form of propaganda. Now, here's a copy of one of their notices, and I've got it here. And you'll see, whoopsie daisy, it's on House of Commons headed paper. And that's in the public domain. Now, if that is allowed to continue without people realizing how they're being conned, it will ultimately lead to the demise of humanity. Now, here to speak to me this evening is Mark Windows. Evening, Mark.
Hello, Eric.
Now, what is this document in my hand, which I've just put down, which I'll show again, all about? And should this be of public interest about an agenda this document, again, which I've put down, is pertaining to?
Well, yes, it was actually sent to me by somebody who was picked to be on a citizens' assembly. We've done several shows on citizens' assemblies. And what it is, it's the end of democracy. You've got organizations which are actually kind of prescribed by the government by 6 parliamentary select committees. And one of them is called Involve. And they are working with the Sortition Foundation and a group called My Society. Now, this is the world of the takeover of everything by NGOs. And guess who's funding Involve, who are rolling out the Citizens' Assembly? Well, it's none other than George Soros and the Open Society. So we have here an agenda which is going above national government. Why would 6 parliamentary groups within the UK government allow this to happen? Why would they allow external lobbyists to take hold of the government narrative, the official government narrative? That's the question. And also, a lot of these people who've been kind of chosen for this are being mentored into this idea of climate change as a religion. So the climate change catastrophophobia religion is a big part of the brainwashing here. So in other words, you can't challenge the official narrative of the climate change agenda. You can't do that. So that's as a given. So what they're doing is they're reducing your choices more and more. And on the recent one in Oxford, what they actually did was voted for the most extreme versions of everything they were asked for, including retrofitting their houses for £25,000 each. And that's just to start with. So they're going to remortgage their houses or get loans from the council or a bank. And this is exactly what the World Bank and people like Maurice Strong and Edmund Rothschild were talking about in 1992. And we've actually done a show called The Man Who Saw the Future, a fellow called George Hunt, who was at one of these conferences, and we can go into that if you want, but we've already covered it in the shows. And that this is an agenda that was thought up on the back of a control system. It's got nothing to do with the climate change agenda. So what we've seen here is just social engineering, but not even very sophisticated.
Mao did similar. He got the youth to turn against the elderly, and there was the Cultural Revolution, which killed millions of people. Again, it was a fake ideology. And let's face it, why should people with this climate change agenda believe scientists, real scientists, who are telling us that it's a load of old bunk, that global man-made global warming, why should people believe them when they can easily believe a 16-year-old schoolgirl and a geriatric television presenter that just reads the script?
Mayday, 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 climate emergency. Yeah, well, the thing is, right, that, Attenborough is just a TV presenter. He's not even a naturalist. He doesn't know anything about nature, because when they actually allowed that documentary to be made, if he had any editorial control, he wouldn't have let them say that walruses falling off cliffs had anything to do with climate change, because he would know, if he'd actually been paying attention, even to his own documentaries in the past and documentaries that have been released, that walruses fall off cliffs when they gather and they get scared. I mean, it's a well-known phenomenon. So there's quite an interesting thing going on here. But your points about where it all came from, I think, is a good starting point. Maybe we should go into that, because there's a big story here.
It's communism. It's backdoor communism. That's basically what it is.
Yes, exactly. And the thing is that you can't call it communism anymore, because that had a bit of a bad press and a bit of a bad write-up. And also it killed about 100 million. So what you need to do is create a new form of global governance. And the new form of global governance started to appear really in the UK in about 2010 with the advent of a thing called the Big Society. And that's where a lot of people started to turn up who were being changed and mentored into programs. And all of these NGOs started appearing. Now, in 1987, a thing called the Brundtland Report went into another report, which was called Our Common Future, which is actually a book that you can buy. And it was authored by her. And basically, the people who are engineering this whole thing and still doing it to this day. But what it was about was a new form of governance. And it's a form of governance that has to get everybody involved. So it's collectivism over individuality. And a lot of that came out of the New Age agenda as well, which mentored people into it. But the Big Society was where this really started. And Obama did the same thing with these citizens groups in America. And Obama did it about the same time, about 2010. And there was an organization that was set up called Unlimited. And they train these people, change agents, all over the world, in every single country. And they said in Parliament in 2011 that the result of the cuts will be one of anger, the degree of which is yet to be realized. The idea of the Big Society is to galvanize that energy. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing basically everything being put forward into a hive mind of collectivism, where anything outside that is demonized. And if you're outside of it, then you're a Nazi, you're far right, you're a conspiracy theorist. It's very, very simple. This template is absolutely simple. You're right, it does come from the old Soviet type of techniques, really, if you want to update Mao and go into that. But when you look at the FSB, which is basically where Soviet intelligence comes from, then you will find that these things are laid out very simply. And you have things like the system of moods, where everything has to be catered for. So in other words, you have to absorb everyone into a hive mind. How do you do that? Well, you need things that cover every different ground. So if they lean to the left politically or the right, you need something for that. If they're in the middle, you need something for that. But you need a common enemy. And the common enemy to unite everybody is climate change and the fear of an apocalypse. It's a very old concept.
Yeah. Well, it's Saul Alinsky, Rules for Radicals. He wrote the book Rules for Radicals in 1972, and a lot of, even a lot of politicians have actually praised Saul Alinsky, which is absolutely amazing. And if you read his book Rules for Radicals, which he actually dedicated to Satan, nice,
Lucifer,
Lucifer, that's right, yes,
the opening page,
a lot of what he advised in there is actually being carried out today.
Well, it is, but what you actually got at the time was Obama and David Cameron actually advocating Saul Alinsky Rules for Radicals, and loads of groups came up, like intentionality, locality, Citizens UK. They all morphed into these kind of big NGOs, and they're actually community groups. They're kind of community interest companies, community groups, and they train people and mentor them into this program. And people go, what do you mean a program? Well, I've been studying it for about 10 years and anyone can see it. We did an article called Big Society Change Agents, and a lot of the links were in there. Then we did other things like New Age Global Governance, but we cover this stuff on the shows practically every week, because it's a spider's web of subversion, but there's one template and you've got one choice, no choice. And that's what it is. But you have to have the illusion of choice. So the illusion of choice is by coercion. You coerce people into it by, don't you want to save the planet? We're killing Mother Earth, Gaia. And when you see these change agents, especially when they're mentored into things like the Findhorn Organisation Foundation up in Scotland, which came out in the 1970s, I just looked at that today, and they put out this appalling film a couple of years ago. And it's really all of the United Nations Agenda 21 principles, which is this thing that came out of the Rio conference, which is basically this new form of governance, which has gone into every single council in the country and all over the world, and these NGOs. And they're advocating it. And what they do is they get these useful idiots in there who they call tribal elders. And basically, they're just idiots in costumes. You know, they know nothing. There's a Mexican fellow in a pawn show, and he's saying, yes, but the ancients knew about it. They knew about what? You know, the tribal elders, we've had it, you know, boys and girls, we've had it. If these people are tribal elders, because they know nothing. I mean, I've got some of the quotes here. We can go into them if you want, but maybe we should get on a bit more outline first, you know.
You could have a dream catcher in the corner and and a drum. Because when
I've got a dream catcher, and it's capturing nightmares. It's a dystopian nightmare in my dream catcher, you know. I had too much to dream last night by the Electric Prunes, you know.
Well, one good thing about this global emergency is that those ding-dongs in London that are doing funny walks, they're a good laugh, and I think they're not quite as good as Monty Python, but perhaps they should get John Cleese down there to show them how to do a proper silly walk, and then we can all have a good laugh.
Well, there was a very well-known clip of one of them doing a very silly walk, but it looks like they're on some sort of drug. I mean, I would say a lot of them are, because it's the wilderness of the mind. But the thing is that people will laugh at this, but it's very, very serious, because this came out of the Rio conference in '92. The wilderness of the mind is the fourth world, the borderless world. We've had the first world, which is meant to be the sort of European kind of idea of this empirical world. You've got the second world, which was Russia, the third world, which is Africa and Asia. And then you've got the fourth world, which is the wilderness of the mind. And that's what these lunatic groups like, well, it's not so lunatic, it's a lobbying group for global governance. Extinction Rebellion is a lobbying group for this hive mind mentoring program, which is basically what some people call the New World Order. But to call it the New World Order is kind of, I think that's a bit misleading, because what you've got here is an unstructured form of governance that people can't see. You know, that's my point, really, is that it's unstructured, it's everywhere, but there's no real name for it. It started out as communitarianism, but it's sustainable development. And Enrico Giovanni, who teaches sustainable development, and he was part of the Enablers of Global Governance 2030 conference this year, said sustainable development, what does it mean? Everything and nothing. So it can mean anything that they want it to mean. Who's they? Well, they are people who are in elite positions, and we don't have to go into things like the Illuminati and stuff like that. It's very, if we think of it as a business template for running the world, that's what it is. It's nothing more and nothing less than that. It's a very draconian business template, because it means that people who aren't really cutting the mustard, in other words, the elderly, people who don't want to join in with it, are going to be basically got rid of. They say that, and this came out of people like Huxley, W.R. Bion. I was looking about him from the Tavistock Institute, how they instigated this stuff. The whole idea of groupthink is the idea that you have to get everyone to agree. And that's what citizens' assemblies are about. If people are wondering why we've come off on this tangent, it's the idea of consensus, that people are seen to agree on a certain subject. And I've seen how that works. I've studied it in detail. Yeah.
It's frightening. It is terrifying. It's a sort of well, I hope I don't sound as if I keep repeating myself, but I'll very briefly, I've seen it 3 times. I've had it in a profession, I've seen it twice, and domestically, around where I live, with planning permission, where they turned majority of people who were against a planning application for it, and it was mind-blowing. I just couldn't believe how quickly people's minds were turned. And these PR people who are employed to do that, you realise how going even further, well, I've often said if the reincarnation of Chairman Mao came back, and you've got a good PR firm, people would vote for them and say, "Oh yes, old Chairman Mao, marvelous. You know, he's good to dogs and animals. You know, he loves animals, and he always has a very, very clean gun before he shoots people. So you know, he's ever so nice like that. People would. You know, I think George Carlin was correct when he said the masses are stupid. They'll believe. They're gullible. People are gullible.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is there that you can then fall into this kind of idea of taking an elitist approach. And I think there's a real danger with that kind of view, personally, in especially the alternative news media, because people think I've woken up and I know all this and I know all that. Well, actually, you don't. I mean, I know very little. I know a lot about certain things and I put it together the best way I can. You always have to be learning with this. What I would say is that we've become kind of expert in the field of looking at how things are joined together. And I think that's what is the most important thing, because most people in compartmentalized thinking, so their whole education and the way that they are made to see reality is in a compartmentalized way. And that is a huge problem. And what they've done very cleverly is they've got everyone as this hive mind, and they think it's through a higher consciousness. And it's not. It's another, what they call an artificial womb, which I find a very fascinating area of social engineering. And that's where a lot of people who assume that they have some kind of superior view of the world are in. They're in another hive mind, an artificial womb. And it's a very intolerant one as well, because if you say anything outside what they believe in, it's negative, and I don't want to engage with it, and they cut things off. Now, this is exactly what change agents do. They goes, I choose not to hear that. They use these kind of phrases which have been implanted into the head. In fact, most people will only repeat things. They're not thinking about what they're saying. And this is very apparent when you try and debate with people who are mentored into the program, especially people like Extinction Rebellion. They'll say the same thing over and over again. And I think I mentioned this before, but when Extinction Rebellion, well, I don't know who they were, but they claimed to be representing them, gate crashed one of the talks we were doing in Glastonbury. It was myself, Sandy Adams, Piers Corbyn, and David Dubine. We all went to the door because Sandy was speaking, and ironically, the slide she had up was the UN Charter of 1947, which basically says they're above the law. So this bloke walks in with his girlfriend and didn't want to pay. And when he was asked to pay, he said, I'm not paying to hear you all lying. Now, if I went into a public meeting and it was a group who'd paid to be there, and I said, you're all lying, a lot of people would probably think, oh, the poor bloke's having a nervous breakdown, or he's got a mental illness or something. But this is kind of normal for this kind of thinking that these people engage in. When we actually got down to debate or asking them things, they couldn't come up with anything. And what he said to me, he said, don't you realize? I said, what do you mean there's a climate emergency? He said, well, he said, half of the southern hemisphere is underwater. I said, no, it's 2/3. Do you know what I mean? It's just clear, but it's nonsensical, and it is the lostness of the mind. But this is, it's very much like what you're talking about, how these communist regimes have taken over. And Extinction Rebellion is a soft Bolshevik group. That's what it is. But it's because you see, the thing is now they've decided we can't have any more wars. The common enemy of humanity has to be humanity itself. So we have to feel that we're a blot on the planet and a cancer on the earth. And this all came out of the environmental movement when it was co-opted by the Club of Rome onwards, really, their first global revolution. It was, in the absence of a new enemy, we found out that climate change would fit the bill. And that I'm paraphrasing here. You can look up the actual quote, and we use it in our talks. And what it was about really was the fact that they can't have continued growth. They brought out this document called Limits to Growth, which was based on sort of algorithms that they'd worked out. And it goes into this idea that we're using too many resources and there's too many people. So from an elite point of view, they're thinking, what do we do about it? Now, my thing about this is really that who are they to know what we should be doing about it? Because they know as much as anybody else. That's my point. In other words, that this hasn't been arrived at really through any philosophical engagement. It's been an idea that people who were brought up in an elite form of education thought of. Now, elite forms of education are just another form of brainwashing. So in other words, when you get these people calling themselves the elders and all this sort of stuff that UN have promoted, they're just complete idiots. They know nothing about anything. And if they knew anything about anything, they wouldn't be there, because you can't be mentored into a hive mind if you've got a mind. And that's the thing I think is about it, which is very, very important, you know.
Well, that's right. That's right. But also, the way people are led into a kind of false fantasy of how it's going to be so marvelous. I've said this before. In the Midlands, I was involved in a project where there's this area of natural beauty, and they wanted to put a housing estate on there.
Yeah.
So what the developer did, I mentioned this on a previous program, so I'll be very quick on this. The developer hired one of these PR firms, and suddenly an application was put in for the most vile industrial complex you could ever wish to see. And the developer got the office junior to draw up some awful drawings, and, you know, concrete works. And then the PR firm went in and helped the community, in inverted commas, and the developer gave money to the local wildlife groups and people like that. And this PR firm, that little badges, you know, Sarah, Nigel, hello, it's all forced, all nice. And what they
it's all false. It's all false. There's no real engagement. Right. I mean, I think you made this point before. It's a very important one, because when you've got, I noticed this. I was watching something this afternoon, and we'll go into that maybe in the second part of what we're going to do on Windows on the World a bit later. But what I noticed about what they had in common was the people who were announcing this kind of, we all need to get together and we all become one hive mind. They were doing it in a way which was totally disingenuous. They didn't look as though they meant what they were saying. Nobody was getting kind of passionate. It was all fake. It was fake tears, fake emotion, and fake belief. And that is the thing, that there was no conviction in any of those people. And if there was any conviction in them, they wouldn't have been there. They wouldn't have been invited. And that's what I find most reprehensible about it, in that it takes away, that they always go on about spirituality, and it's become a candy floss throwaway word that people who don't want to face reality use when they're confronted with a fact. And that is absolutely appalling, because a lot of these things really are about a struggle in a way. And then you go, oh, struggle. Oh, that's really negative. Well, in actual fact, if you're wrestling with something, trying to work something out, you often do find a solution. And solutions are often found in very, very strenuous and stressful circumstances. I'm not talking about where you get overstressed, but I'm talking about where there's a bit of pressure. And these people are basically becoming the wilderness of the mind. They're all becoming a group, and a lot of these people are quite old. And what it is, they needed to get Westerners into this kind of style of thinking. And what you're seeing is the result of that. It's a disingenuousness which runs through all public office. And these people, they don't really care whether they're telling the truth. And this was very apparent at council meetings. You've got paid facilitators being there, which is what you're talking about. When we went to the Elephant and Castle regeneration in South London, they were completely disingenuous as to what they were saying. And what they do is they have a limited word salad that they use. And they talk about things like diversity and empowerment. And we covered that in our last show, Brainwashing Britain. I mean, I think that organization I talked about was really I can't remember what they're called now. It wasn't Open Society, but I'll look it up again a bit later.
Yeah.
And they were basically mentoring everyone into this hive mind of a very limited use of words. And that's what I found going into councils from the sort of mid-90s onwards. I found they started using it. Maybe I was a bit late to it, but I went to some of these meetings. I got involved in a festival in Walthamstow, and it was put on by somebody I knew who was a promoter. And he said, they don't want us. They don't want this festival there because they can't control it. And they didn't want it. And at that very festival, I saw the person who was going to change Walthamstow completely, a fellow called Clyde Lokes, who's now rolling out what they call livability in Oxford. And livability, by the way, is going all around the world. It's just a new name for Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, the Habitat conferences, all the rest of it. So what you're seeing and what you've described to me is absolutely spot on there, because you talked about the engagement was through PR companies, and everything's become PR. And I think in the wider picture, we can talk about how news became PR in the 80s. All these things, everything now has no meaning. It has a very limited kind of engagement that people repeat.
That's right. That's right. And I think that another thing, I've been down to planning meetings and I've spoken. Now, within the last year or so, you can't speak to the councillors because very few turn up, and they leg it out the back door, so they don't speak to the people. And when you do see them, they're patting the backs of developers, because if you look at their outside interests, these councillors, a lot of them are, inverted commas, PR advisors and analysts and that type of thing. But what I've found is you could actually speak to them. I went up to one of them and I said, excuse me, this is destroying the environment. And suddenly there was a mentor next to this counsellor who'd obviously been on one of these neuro-linguistic programming courses. And she said, but don't be negative. You've got lots of woods still there. It's a very small proportion of the area. When you look, there's lots of greenery around.
Yeah, but Chris, you're a glass half empty guy. I'm a glass half.
Oh, that's right. You're going against the community, because this is for the community, and then you're sort of, you're a nasty person, you're a fascist, you're a Nazi, you're a naughty person.
Well, that's a very interesting point, because they need to be able to steer you into a position of defensiveness, and that's how they do it. So what they'll do is start closing doors of choices around you, and you'll end up feeling so exasperated that you'll probably explode at them, which is what they want. So this is a form of mental abuse, actually, because it's what psychopaths do to people. But what they're doing is they're doing it in a way where they're kind of doing it by stages, so you don't see it. Whereas a psychopath will go, no, I didn't say that. I didn't say that. I never said that about you. And they'll just lie to you like that. But these people don't do it in that way. They do it with this kind of smiley engagement. But what they're doing is they're trained. They, who's the big they? Well, they are people who've been trained into what we're talking about, which is basically the principles of this new communitarian program. Call it communitarian. It doesn't really matter what you call it, because the fella who invented communitarianism, Otzi, he could not even define what it meant himself. Just as the people who invented, you see, sustainable development was defined as environmentalism and development. So in other words, they had to get people on board to worship the earth. The World Bank needed an excuse to take over the world. Well, why don't we get them to think that they're going to save the world, and then they'll give us the infrastructure? And it's as simple as that. But people get into this kind of view of it that, in other words, it becomes a moral crusade for them. And the thing is with what you're saying, I've seen that in council meetings, and the effrontery of these people is what actually shuts people up, because they can't believe that these people are so audacious in what they're doing and so devious in what they're doing. And most people can't react to that in public. And one of the keys to dealing with this is to learn to be able to react to what they're doing in public, because what they're using is psychological subversion. And yes, I mean, all this neuro-linguistic programming stuff, it's all part of it. And basically, I mean, some people might disagree, because, I mean, I think some people have the idea that it helps some people to express themselves or engage, but basically it's about controlling other people. Now, the thing is that, I don't know about you, but I've seen people sometimes who truth just pours out of them, and it's like, it can be someone who's very angry, and this is another thing, it's that they seem to, these emotions, they all call them as negative, you see. Whereas I've heard people ranting at the top of their voices, and they're coming out with brilliant stuff, So it's a kind of, so what they're doing is I noticed this in council meetings. I felt as though I was being paralyzed, being slowly paralyzed. The discourse was slowly empowering me.
I'm exactly the same. I know, and I've been straight with you. Between you and I lost it. I almost, well, I say lost it. I almost lost my temper. and I shouldn't have done. I like to keep calm, but it really got me. And you just hit this brick wall, basically. You're sort of, oh, and then you're marginalised. Oh, he's the nutter that's lost his temper. So I calmed down after that, and I'm all nice and peace and love and that type of thing. But what got me is they were twisting everything. Everything you said to them was twisted round, as if you are a very nasty person because you're going against the community and the sustainable development, and you're not into the environment, and oh, how awful. And I found that these change agents, what they were doing, they were turning people against me, and who were normally on my side, and I backed off pretty quick. It
divide and rule strategy.
Yes.
I mean, on a more comedic side of things, several years ago, I went up to have this meeting, and it was basically a dreadlocked public school boy, and I thought, it just looks like a complete change agent. And he was selling sustainable development. And this fella that we knew, he was a little bit unhinged, actually. And he says to me, well, I'll give you what happened. There was a few of us in the room, and this change agent went out of the room, and I said, this is all Agenda 21. This is all about the sustainable development stuff, and it's all mind control, really, what he's talking. And then this rather unhinged fella came back. When the fella came back in the room, he said, Mark's decided that this is unhinged and he doesn't want anything to do with it. Right? He said he's mind control. And I was like, you idiot. You know what I mean? It was just like, and then I said, yeah, well, I don't agree with it, And so I was marginalized at that point, Yes. But that was just a more comedic kind of thing, really. But that was years ago when I saw that,
Well, that's right, and as Cider Guy has just said, I've put this up on the screen here, it's hard to stay cool when you're constantly dealing with fools.
Yeah, I think there's a real danger here, though, because I fall into this myself. I mean, I was talking to a friend of mine, and he says, you've got zero tolerance. And I said, no, I'm very tolerant with people who I think are okay and are saying something that's reasonable. But I'm intolerant to people who are just repeating stuff that's not even from their own minds. And I am intolerant to that now. I can't engage with it because you're up against people who can't think. And that was one of the things that we put out in that last show, that people have been trained not to think. So the thing is about this sort of stuff, it's all about having an end goal, and they want to get there by any means possible. So that's not public engagement, that's just not public engagement at all.
That's right. Well, we got here, Commander Scaramanga said, is your mystery guest at 9 o'clock tonight David Attenborough?
Mayday. Climate emergency. Seals and walruses are dying. Our world is warming by 4 degrees. Yeah, I mean, it's something. I mean, what I don't understand how people can fall for that. You see, because I used to work in show business, and all he's doing is putting on a fake voice and repeating stuff in a script, and he does it in a very deliberative sort of way. It's
That's
sort
right.
of, if we don't take affirmative action within 12 minutes, we could be in a terrible situation. I mean, why do people listen to that? I don't really get it.
Well, I used to know a chap who was a comedy, I won't say magician, but an illusionist, because there's a big difference between a magician and illusionist. And people may have remembered him. Do you remember Dave Starbuck? There's 2 Dave Starbucks.
Yeah.
One up north, and there was one down south. It was the one up north.
Yeah.
And he said that he first noticed that there was something weird going on when authorities were actually using the same, shall we say, techniques as he used in his act, like, putting stuff in plain view and hiding stuff in plain view. And he said, really, all Parliament was, and local councils, the higher echelons there, they were magicians or illusionists, because they're carrying out.
It's funny you mention that, Chris, because there was a GCHQ slideshow released years ago. Now, I think it was genuine. I don't think it was fake, because there's one thing that British intelligence is very good at, and that's completely messing things up. Do you know what I mean? So someone's probably just released it by accident. Now, one of the things that they were saying in there is we want to create cyber magicians. we want to create illusionists. And they were talking about that showman who was used during the Second World War because he started putting up inflatable tanks, and they used inflatable tanks to fool the enemy. Right?
Yeah.
And it was all about that. And they had a fella, and he was a card illusionist with a pack of cards, you know, with the cards flying from one hand to the other. And that was on a GCHQ slideshow. But what they were also doing, they had a fella, and he was like this, going, oh, like that. And that's what they were trying to do. That they create this dissonance as well. So basically, it's very subversive. And the people who are best at this and who are best explaining it are actually the Soviets. But what it's gone down to is British intelligence went all over the world, and it came out of these places like the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations. And when you look into the history of that, it was all about how to deal with people who've got post-traumatic stress disorder after the Second World War. This Wilfred Bion, and he did a whole thing about it. And basically, they were trying to find a way of getting out to people this kind of idea that they would become group thinkers and hive mind, and how's the best way to put them into these artificial wounds. And a lot of these people, in actual fact, it's quite interesting. I don't think they started off with evil intentions or anything like that, although I have to kind of disagree with that in the case of Freud, because I think he was just a pervert and a lunatic. When I read the stuff that came out of him and psychology and psychiatry. But some of these people were probably trying to work things out, and then the military intelligence side kicks in, and of course the military intelligence side is going to accentuate this into a weaponized system because that's all it knows. So I think the whole thing is quite interesting, really, in that respect. But when you start getting local councils using this sort of military intelligence stuff, then you know that you're living in a totalitarian system, and the evidence of that is pretty much everywhere. And every time I scratch the surface with this, I find hundreds more of these organizations. It's like it came out of Our Common Future in 1987 that we were going to see this huge rise in NGOs. It was going to be basically a shadow government for the world. And it was the way to get everybody to agree. So you roll out these NGOs, you empower them, and then you start taking over countries. I mean, I can go into that a bit later if you want, or maybe do it in the second half. It's probably going slightly off what we're talking about here, you know.
Well, that's right. But really, when you're talking about sort of military intelligence, and I mean, my father, he was in frontline intelligence during the war, not off very high rank. He was actually in the front line, you know, dodging the bullets. And the nonsense they were told to get them into the front line, you know, for example, they were told that all Germans are atheists. They're not Christian at all. And we're fighting against this. And the first thing you saw when you saw a dead German was got mittens on their belts, which is God be with us. And they just rolled out nothing but nonsense, just to get people to fight. And they're using the similar techniques now to get people to do the most unbelievable things. And I've noticed they're also dividing groups as well. For example, they had the other day on local BBC, should people over 85 be allowed to vote?
Well, this is an interesting thing that comes up. I saw this on a Facebook thread the other day, and someone said, well, all these people who are deniers will be dead in 20 to 25 years' time, then we can really take over. And I said, what, you mean the World Bank? You know, I mean, it's incredible, really. But we are in that Brave New World system now. I don't think everyone's in it. And I'm kind of doubtful as to whether this stuff will work long term, because the climate change thing has been so overdone now that I think there are cracks appearing in that all over the place. And once it's like any template, once it's busted, it's kind of busted forever, you know?
Well, I found, for example, I can say this now, but Corbyn, before the election, he had a chance. And then when he said that about the climate emergency, now I go to the local market most times to get, you know, the fruit and whatever. And I speak to the stallholders there who got to know me, and all of them said, well, he had Labour Party was doing all right, but he lost it when he started doing this thing about the climate emergency. And they all agreed. They all said, oh, he's lost it because it's a load of old rubbish. And I haven't really found anybody that believes it. I really haven't. I mean, perhaps I'm very naive, or perhaps I live in a very shallow world, but No, I mean, even younger people are beginning to see through it. And that's why they're going for the youth. They're going putting it into schools. For example, did you know that Al Gore's marvelous work of fiction, what was it now?
An
Inconvenient
inconvenient truth.
Lie. Sorry, Truth. I was going to say lie. Was shown in all the schools. No, I didn't realise that.
Yeah, but the judge actually said that they had to give a counter point of view if they were going to show it or edit it, because he stopped after 15 major lies within it. And he said it was a very dishonest film. Now, the thing is that that's still getting shown. That's an interesting point, because I think what happens is that this is what seems to be the case, that you'll get this big outcry and it will just carry on as though the outcry never happened. Now, that you get quite a lot these days because of the way that news media and media in general moves so quickly, and because it's so kind of lightweight, you know, it's not really got any resonance to it. So it's a soundbite, then it just gets replaced, and the soundbites keep going. And that's what they keep doing. So yes, the only analysis you find is outside of that. And of course, it's marginalized, just like you are in the council meeting. So it's a very simple template. I don't think there's anything complicated about this sort of intelligence model that they're rolling out. It can't be complicated, because look at the people who are following it in Extinction Rebellion. I mean, it can't be complicated for those people to do it, because they're basically appealing to narcissism and a very kind of hive mind consensus view of reality. Now, there is no consensus view of reality, and the view of reality is often very subjective. So loads of people have wrestled with this over hundreds and thousands of years, and the fact that it's just been socially engineered into a concept, and a very narrow one, is to me quite an interesting thing. And I don't think it's something that is difficult to think outside the box in. So I think we should move on from that now. Yeah.
I agree with you. And well, I mean, what you were saying about these, I mean, the films are very, very powerful. For example, until recently, you probably and I used to believe that lemmings used to commit mass suicide, and it was a mystery to the world how they do it. Well, it was Walt Disney thought that lemmings were very boring, so they got cameramen to throw the poor little sods off the side of a cliff to make them look exciting. But they don't commit mass suicide.
No. I mean, we brought that up in
my childhood. I believe that lemmings committed mass suicide.
Well, people still do it. They're like lemmings. Now, we covered that in one of our sketches with Greta Thunderbird and David Attenborough, and that was one of the things we actually brought up. And she was saying lemmings don't commit mass suicide, you know, because he was saying something like, like lemmings, we're falling over the precipice, and all this kind of crap, you know. And she said lemmings don't commit mass suicide. It was a Disney invention, you know, a bit like your climate catastrophophobia. And that's the thing, that once something gets into the public, it doesn't matter if it's true or not. And this happened, I don't know if you remember, this is a really good example of it. Do you remember when there was that Qatari ambassador's daughter, and she called herself Nurse Naira, and she was saying, they see the babies out of the incubators and on the cold floor. And it was a vile performance. And it was all of those neocons like Tom Lantos and these really sinister people who were just trying to get the war going. And that was completely discredited, that it came out of a PR agency to, what was it called? It was called Knowlton PR agency.
Yeah.
It was a partnership, actually, but it came out of a PR agency. They actually got that together. Now, the thing is that was discredited 2 weeks later, but everybody just remembers that performance. They don't remember when it's been corrected. So if you go in and give them something which is very powerful emotionally, the public will react more to that than the truth that comes afterwards, because the emotional bond has already been made. So in other words, that's the way they do it. And that's what Gail Bradbrook talks about. People respond to emotion and belief, not fact, which is exactly how this social engineering concept works. It works on emotion and belief. So belief doesn't mean something's true. It means that someone believes it's true because they've had an emotional response to it. And I think that's absolutely fascinating, because it's so basic and it seems to keep working over and over again.
Well, I think on that note, shall we wrap the program up
Yeah.
now for our and let our guests guess who the mystery guest will be? I think he's some sort of weirdo. I don't really know. And
Is that bloke from Hertford, isn't it? Or is he from Essex?
Yeah.
Or is he from Sussex? I don't know. He's an international man of mystery.
That's right. And, and we'll join them now, not on this channel. It'll be on, hang on, if you look down the bottom, because I've been showing off with all these banners all evening.
It's very professional, Chris.
Oh, thank you. God, flattery will get you everywhere. Now, after this show,
I'm a change agent now, am I?
I'm a change agent. windowsontheworld.net live tonight at 9 p.m. So that's all right. And with mystery guest, of course. So go on to windowsontheworld.net. If you go onto this channel,
well, it's the YouTube channel, actually, Chris. It's the Windows on the World YouTube channel. Windows on the World YouTube channel, because we're new to all this. I probably will try and put it on the website, but I don't want to get too complicated at once. I want to keep it nice and simple.
Oh, sorry about that. So it's the Windows on
the World YouTube channel, yeah.
YouTube channel. Well, before we go, we've got 4 more comments in there. So we got here, what's this? I watched the disgraceful theatrics of XR Dr. Rupert Reed telling 10-year-olds that the world was on fire and they would probably wouldn't have more than 12 years left, etc. Absolutely disgusting. And that's
an absolute misquote, because Saint Greta said it was only her house was on fire. So he's completely misquoted the great Greta Thunberg there.
Yes, that's right. That's right. We got here, Greta is a boy just like his mother.
We don't want to get into all that. We don't want to be using these subversive tactics.
And,
it's Christmas, why not?
My word, you guessed it. Anyway, we look forward to seeing you at 9 o'clock. Not on what I put on the banner, but on Mark's YouTube channel. I can't get everything right, can I?
No.
So we'll see you then. So it's time for, go and have a cup of tea and go to the loo and have a biscuit and all that. So we'll see you at 9 o'clock. Thank you very much.
Windows on the World YouTube channel.
That's right. Not windowsontheworld.net. Oh, but you can see that on Sunday, can't you?
Yes, we go out on Sunday doing the radio show, and this is live. This is the live stream. Yes.
This is a live stream. Okay, we'll see you in about an hour and a quarter. Thank you very much, everybody.
See you in a bit.
Good night. See you in a bit.